Happy Sabbath. How are you all? I hope you all had a good week. And tonight is Sabbath that we could study His Word. And I ask the Lord to continue to bless you and watch over you and your family and to grant you peace, love, and joy. If you remember last week, we talked about Jacob living in Succoth, but for a short period of time. And then he journeyed onward to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan. And therefore, Jacob's prayer at Bethel 20 years ago, that God would bring him again in peace to his own land, had been granted. For a time, he lived in the valley of Shechem. And it was here that Abraham, more than 100 years before, had made his first encampment and erected his first altar. And here Jacob bought a piece of land from Hamor, and he spread his tents there. And he erected an altar there too, and called it El Elohi Israel, God, the God of Israel. Like Abraham, Jacob set up an altar beside his tent to worship the Lord, calling the members of his household to the morning and evening sacrifice. And it was here that he dug the well to which 17 centuries later came Jacob's descendant, the Savior. He was here sitting down at noontime. And it was here that Christ told his disciples and those who were listening on that the well of water springing up into everlasting life. If you want to read that story, it is in John chapter 4. So now let's move forward to chapter 34 of Genesis. Let me read verse 1. One day, Dinah, the daughter of Jacob and Leah, went to visit some of the young women who lived in the area. The birth of Dinah was recorded without much comment in chapter 30, if you remember. But once Jacob and his sons had left Padan Aram and settled in the vicinity of Shechem, Dinah became the center of the conflict between Jacob and the people who lived in Canaan. Verse 2. But when the local prince, Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hivite, saw Dinah, he seized her and raped her. But then he fell in love with her, and he tried to win her affection with tender words. He said to his father Hamor, "Get me this young girl. I want to marry her." Soon Jacob heard that Shechem had defiled his daughter Dinah. But since his sons were out in the fields herding his livestock, he said nothing until they returned. He seized her and raped her. What does that mean? Let me explain a little bit. In the ancient society, I had mentioned before that marriages were arranged with economical and sociological goals in mind. Usually, the couple could not pursue their love interests. Sometimes, to avoid facing parental non-acceptance of their choice of partner, they would bypass the process of having their parents to arrange marriage. Instead, they engaged in consensual intercourse. Whether this premarital sex was initiated by the would-be husband or with mutual agreement, the result is similar. It would be termed rape. And the parents would generally have to go ahead with allowing the marriage. So if you'd like to read a little bit more about this regulation, it is in Exodus chapter 22, verse 16 and 17. Also Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 28 to 29. So whether Dinah had been raped or just eloped, the family was shamed by this incident. A rape would certainly be tragic and devastating to Dinah and the family. But if Dinah were in any way involved in the decision, the family would be shamed not only by Shechem's act, but also by Dinah's lack of respect for the family. Though the Hivite son, Shechem, genuinely loved Dinah, the point is that he laid with her, apparently against her will, and thus humiliated her. You know, Jacob was curiously silent about the incident. When he heard what had happened to Dinah, he waited for the return of his sons. The reason behind Jacob's silence is not quite clear at this point. Let's read on. Verse 6. Hamor, Shechem's father, came to discuss the matter with Jacob. Meanwhile, Jacob's sons had come in from the field as soon as they heard what had happened. They were shocked and furious that their sister had been raped. Shechem had done a disgraceful thing against Jacob's family, something that should never be done. Hamor was Shechem's father. He was the one who sold the piece of land to Jacob. He came to Jacob to discuss the matter. But after Dinah's brothers heard what had happened, they were shocked and furious because Shechem had shamed the family. Verse 8. Hamor tried to speak with Jacob and his sons. My son Shechem is truly in love with your daughter, he said. Please let him marry her. In fact, let's arrange other marriages too. You give us your daughters for our sons, and we will give you our daughters for your sons. And you may live among us. The land is open to you. Settle here and trade with us, and feel free to buy property in the area. Hamor seemed unaware of the rage of Jacob's sons. He presented to Jacob the economic benefits of intermarriage between their two families. Verse 11. Then Shechem himself spoke to Dinah's father and brothers. Please be kind to me and let me marry her, he begged. I will give you whatever you ask, no matter what dowry or gift you demand. I will gladly pay it. Just give me the girl as my wife. Well, the son of Hamor, Shechem, was about to give anything. He begged Jacob, take anything, I'll give you. I just want to marry the girl. And then he talked about dowry. So this is not the dowry given by the bride's family to the groom. Shechem is actually offering a bride price to Jacob. Remember we had explained the bride price in the previous chapters? Jacob didn't have any property or money, so he had to pay the bride price by working 14 years for both Leah and Rachel. And here Shechem, he's wealthy, so he could offer Jacob that whatever bride price you want, I'll gladly pay it. Verse 13. But since Shechem had defiled their sister Dinah, Jacob's son responded deceitfully to Shechem and his father Hamor. They said to them, we couldn't possibly allow this because you're not circumcised. It would be a disgrace for our sister to marry a man like you. But here's the solution. If every man among you will be circumcised like we are, then we will give you our daughters, and we'll take your daughters for ourselves. We will live among you and become one people. But if you don't agree to be circumcised, we will take her and be on our way. Jacob reaped the result of his own mistakes. His sons copied his deception, but killing was their goal. They required Shechem and his father Hamor and all the men to be circumcised. That was such a treacherous plan. Moreover, Jacob's sons disrespected the religious significance of circumcision. It was a sign between God and his people, but they abused it for the purpose of inflicting a revenge. Verse 18, Hamor and his son Shechem agreed to their proposal. Shechem wasted no time in acting on this request, for he wanted Jacob's daughter desperately. Shechem was a highly respected member of his family, and he went with his father Hamor to present this proposal to the leaders at the town gate. Well, Hamor and company considered this a small price to pay for a bride and all of Shechem's possession, so they agreed. Let's read on, we understand more. These men are our friends, they said. Let's invite them to live here among us and trade freely. Look, the land is large enough to hold them. We can take their daughters as wives and let them marry ours. But they will consider staying here and becoming one people with us only if all of our men are circumcised, just as they are. But if we do this, all their livestock and possessions will eventually be ours. Come, let's agree to their terms and let them settle here among us. So all the men in the town council agree with Hamor and Shechem, and every male in the town was circumcised. All agreed to Hamor, all the Shechemites. Probably they didn't really know or care about the religious significance of the rite. They agreed only to advance their interest. What was their interest? That all Jacob's livestock and possession will eventually be theirs. Verse 25. But 3 days later, when their wounds were still sore, 2 of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, who were Dinah's full brothers, took their swords and entered the town without opposition. Then they slaughtered every male there, including Hamor and his son Shechem. They killed them with the swords, then took Dinah from Shechem's house and returned to their camp. What brutality! So cruel. Will there be a consequence for these 2 brothers in doing this? Well, because they slaughtered the men of Shechem, their own descendants will be scattered far and wide. Let's read what Genesis 49:7 said. And this was their father Jacob's last words to these 2 sons. Simeon and Levi are 2 of a kind. Their weapons are instruments of violence. May I never join in their meetings. May I never be a party to their plans. For in their anger they murdered men, and they crippled oxen just for sport. A curse on their anger, for it is fierce. A curse on their wrath, for it is cruel. I will scatter them among the descendants of Jacob. I will disperse them throughout Israel. This was the last word of Jacob, and this is what he foresaw that would happen to these 2 brothers. Let's read on verse 27. Meanwhile, the rest of Jacob's sons arrived, finding the men slaughtered. They plundered the town because their sister had been defiled there. They seized all the flocks and herds and donkeys, everything they could lay their hands on, both inside the town and outside in the fields. They looted all the wealth and plundered their houses. They also took all their little children and wives and led them away as captives. Looted. Besides slaughtering the entire male population in Shechem, the brothers took all the women and children, as well as all the goods in the city as plunder. Presumably, the brothers rationalized their conduct by insisting that such is the mandated bride price for the violation of the sister. Nevertheless, the level of brutality is incomprehensible and far exceed the justifiable retribution for the crime of the city's prince, Shechem. The circumcision required was a ruse just to weaken the man. Simeon and Levi killed many, and the rest of the brothers, they plundered the city, and leaving harmless people devastated. What a story. Why such cruelty and treacherous acts in a supposedly God-fearing family? Didn't we just read that he brings his children to the altar morning and evening to worship God? Right? Jacob brought his children, right, to the altar that he erected morning and evening. The book Patriarchs and Prophets gave 2 reasons, and I have 1 observation, and here they are. Number 1, there were false gods in Jacob's camp. Idolatry had gained a foothold in his household. Number 2, the children of Jacob venturing into association with the ungodly. And the author of Patriarchs and Prophets said, he who seeks pleasure among those that fear not God is placing himself on Satan's ground and inviting his temptations. 3rd reason, poor parental skill on Jacob's part. The above passage indicated that he played a passive role in dealing with the assault of his daughter Dinah. Moreover, he either didn't know it or allowed his son to do their own negotiation and eventually slaughter the whole entire male population of Shechem. Verse 30. Afterward, Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have ruined me. You've made me stink among all the people of this land, among all the Canaanites and Perizzites. We are so few that they will join forces and crush us. I will be ruined, and my entire household will be wiped out. But why should we let him treat our sister like a prostitute? They retorted angrily. After the atrocity, Jacob finally awakens and becomes concerned. A bit late, don't you think? He's now worried because he feared retribution from the other Canaanites in the area, who were much more numerous than his family. What a story. So what does this narrative reveal to us about God's character? Well, this story is about cruelty and brutality involved when Jacob's son supposedly was defending the family honor and concerning the sister who was abused by the son of the local chief. Nevertheless, it also carries along the theme that God works through and often despite the imperfection of human being, because he's long-suffering and he's merciful and he keeps his promises. And this is what he says in Deuteronomy 9:5. It is not because of your righteousness or your integrity that you're going in to take possession of their land, but on account of the wickedness of these nations, to accomplish that he, the Lord, swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The sins of God's chosen people may delay, but they do not ultimately frustrate the fulfillment of God's promise. promises. What does this narrative tell us of how we should live? We are in the world, but not of the world. Though Jacob was living in Canaan, he was not of Canaan. His God was not their God. His ways were not their ways. He was a stranger in an alien land. We too need to realize that as well. We are not to adopt the habits of the world around us just because we live where we do. Our calling is higher than that. The things that excite the people of the world are not necessarily the thing that will excite the citizens of heaven. We need to be careful while we are here, isn't it? God has all the standard written in his book. He told us what to do. We need to follow it. Happy Sabbath.